Night falls over the western desert of Iraq. The wind cuts across the empty landscape, carrying snow and freezing rain across miles of barren rock and sand. There are no trees here, no hills to hide behind, just endless open desert stretching toward the horizon. 8 men step down from a helicopter into that darkness. This is the story of Bravo 20, one of the most famous and controversial missions ever carried out by the British Special Air Service. A patrol that would become a legend of endurance, survival, and brutal reality behind enemy lines. To understand the danger these men were walking into, we have to go back to the winter of 1991. The Gulf War had erupted after Saddam Hussein's forces invaded Kuwait. In response, a massive international coalition led by the United States launched Operation Desert Storm. Coalition aircraft began striking Iraqi military targets across the country. But Saddam Hussein had a strategy. Iraqi forces began launching Scud ballistic missiles at Israel and Saudi Arabia. These missiles were not just weapons, they were political tools. Saddam's hope was simple, yet strategically calculated to fracture the international coalition. If Israel retaliated, Arab nations fighting alongside the United States might abandon the coalition. The alliance against Iraq could fracture overnight. Stopping the Scud attacks became a top priority. The problem was that the Scud launchers were mobile. They could move across the desert, launch a missile, and disappear before aircraft could locate them. From the air, they were almost impossible to track. So, coalition commanders turned to the one force trained to operate deep behind enemy lines: the British Special Air Service. SAS patrols were deployed into western Iraq with one mission: find the launchers, track them, and guide coalition airstrikes to destroy them. One of those patrols was given the call sign Bravo 20. 8 highly trained soldiers selected for a dangerous reconnaissance mission deep inside Iraqi territory. Their patrol commander was Sergeant Andy McNabb, an experienced SAS operator used to working in hostile environments. Second in command was Sergeant Vince Phillips, responsible for technical systems and communications. The patrol also included Corporal Chris Ryan, a soldier known for his survival skills and endurance. Alongside them were Corporal Ian Pring, known as Dinger, Corporal Bob Concilio, Corporal Steve Lane, Lance Corporal Mal McGowan, and Lance Corporal Mike Coburn. 8 men, 1 patrol, and a mission that would take them hundreds of kilometers behind enemy lines. On the night of January 22nd, 1991, an RAF Chinook helicopter lifted off from a base in Saudi Arabia. Inside the aircraft, the SAS patrol sat silently among their equipment: weapons, radios, demolition charges, ammunition, survival gear, everything they needed to survive alone in the desert. Hours later, the helicopter crossed into Iraqi airspace. Below them stretched the vast western desert, flat, exposed, and hostile. When the Chinook finally touched down, the 8 men moved quickly into the darkness. The helicopter lifted away, disappearing into the night. The patrol was now alone, almost 300 kilometers inside Iraq. Their mission had officially begun. The plan was straightforward in theory. Bravo 20 would establish a hidden observation post overlooking a major Iraqi supply route between Baghdad and the west. From there, they would monitor traffic moving along the road. If they spotted Scud missile launchers, they would radio their coordinates to coalition aircraft. Airstrikes would destroy the targets. The patrol also had a secondary objective. They were to locate and sabotage underground fiber optic communication cables linking Iraqi military positions to Baghdad. Cutting those cables could disrupt the Iraqi command network across the region. But the moment the patrol began moving across the desert, they realized something was very wrong: the weather. The men had prepared for desert heat. Instead, they found themselves in a brutal winter storm. Cold rain turned into sleet, then snow. The temperature dropped rapidly. The desert wind drove freezing moisture through their clothing. Within hours, the men were soaked and freezing. Every soldier carried a massive Bergen backpack packed with equipment and ammunition. Some loads weighed close to 90 kilograms, more than 200 pounds of gear. Moving with that weight across open desert was exhausting, even in good conditions. In freezing snow, it became brutal. The patrol was forced to adopt a slow shuttle movement. They carried some equipment forward, dropped it, then walked back to retrieve the rest. Every movement drained energy, and every hour increased the danger. Then came the first serious problem: communications. When the patrol attempted to test their radio equipment, they discovered something alarming. Their main communication systems were failing. The high-frequency radios would not transmit properly. The tactical air beacon also malfunctioned. Even worse, they could hear headquarters broadcasting messages to them, but headquarters could not hear anything they were saying. The patrol was effectively cut off. 8 soldiers operating deep behind enemy lines, without reliable communication, without air support, and with freezing weather slowly draining their strength. Still, the mission continued. The patrol pushed deeper into Iraqi territory, searching for a suitable location to establish their observation post. But the terrain gave them almost no cover. The western Iraqi desert is not the rolling sand dunes people imagine. Much of it is flat, rocky ground with scattered ridges and almost no vegetation. There was nowhere to hide. Every movement risked exposure. The freezing weather made everything worse. Water soaked through boots and clothing. The men were beginning to feel the early symptoms of hypothermia. Hands numb, muscles stiff, energy fading. Then, on January 24th, everything changed. A lone figure appeared on the horizon, a young goat herd walking through the desert. The patrol froze. The man had seen them. In an instant, their covert mission was compromised. The patrol now faced the same brutal dilemma many reconnaissance teams encounter behind enemy lines. Do they detain the civilian and risk escalation, or do they release him and hope he says nothing? They watched the goat herd disappear into the distance, but the damage was already done. Not long after, Iraqi forces began appearing in the area. What started as distant movement quickly turned into something far more serious. Vehicles, soldiers, and armored personnel carriers moving across the desert. The patrol had been discovered. Within minutes, the situation exploded into violence. Gunfire tore across the empty landscape as Iraqi troops opened fire. Tracer rounds streaked through the night sky. The SAS patrol returned fire immediately. Grenade launchers fired explosive rounds across the desert. Law rockets slammed into approaching vehicles. The firefight intensified. But the reality was obvious. 8 men against a much larger Iraqi force. Remaining in position meant certain death. The patrol needed to break contact and escape. The original escape plan called for moving south towards Saudi Arabia, but Iraqi forces were already closing from that direction. The only possible route was northwest, toward the Syrian border, more than 120 kilometers away, 75 miles of freezing desert on foot. And with Iraqi forces now hunting them, the patrol began moving into the darkness. Snow whipped across the landscape as they pushed forward. Gunfire echoed behind them. And then, in the chaos of the storm and the retreat, something catastrophic happened. The patrol became separated. 8 men who had trained together for years were suddenly split into smaller groups in the freezing desert. Group 1 was led by Andy McNabb. With him were Dinger Pring, Steve Lane, Bob Concilio, and Mal McGowan. Group 2 consisted of Chris Ryan, Vince Phillips, and Mike Coburn. Each group was now alone, lost in the freezing Iraqi desert. With Iraqi soldiers searching the area and the Syrian border still 75 miles away, what followed next would become one of the most extraordinary survival stories in modern military history, because not all of those men would make it home. Snow lashes across the empty Iraqi desert. The wind howls through broken ridgelines and frozen wadis as night closes in. The temperature drops well below freezing. Visibility collapses under a blizzard that few soldiers expected to encounter in the Middle East. Somewhere in that storm, scattered across miles of hostile ground, members of the SAS patrol known as Bravo 20 are running for their lives. Hours earlier, they had been a single 8-man reconnaissance team. Now they are split, hunted, freezing, and alone. Their mission has collapsed, and survival has become the only objective. The separated patrol elements now face a brutal reality. 8 men must somehow cover nearly 120 kilometers of hostile territory to reach the Syrian border. Behind them, Iraqi troops are searching the desert. Ahead of them lies freezing terrain, exhaustion, and the constant threat of death from exposure. For the second group of the patrol, the cold becomes the first killer. Sergeant Vince Phillips, the patrol's technical specialist, is struggling badly with the freezing conditions. The men had deployed expecting desert heat, not a winter storm. Their clothing is soaked, their boots are filled with freezing water. Every step becomes heavier as the night drags on. The tension rises with every mile they attempt to cover. Phillips grows weaker with each hour. His body begins shutting down under the brutal cold. Without proper winter equipment, the freezing wind cuts straight through his clothing. Eventually, the cold wins. Phillips collapses into the snow and ice, succumbing to severe hypothermia somewhere in the Iraqi wilderness. The patrol has already lost one man to the environment before even reaching the border, but the nightmare is only beginning. As the men continue their escape across the freezing desert, another disaster unfolds. Lance Corporal Mike Coburn becomes separated from Chris Ryan in the darkness. The storm, the terrain, and the chaos of the retreat pull them apart. Coburn now finds himself alone. Not long after the separation, he encounters Iraqi forces moving through the area. Gunfire erupts in the darkness. Coburn is hit, a bullet tearing into his ankle and another striking his arm. Bleeding and unable to move quickly, his chances of escape collapse. Iraqi soldiers close in. Moments later, he is captured. One more member of the patrol removed from the fight. Meanwhile, the other half of the team is fighting its own desperate battle. Group 1, led by Andy McNabb, pushes relentlessly through the freezing desert. With him are Dinger Pring, Bob Consiglio, Steve Lane, and Mal McGowan. Their goal is simple: reach Syria. But the journey is brutal. The men are exhausted, dehydrated, and freezing as they move across the empty landscape. Every mile takes enormous effort. Then they see something that might change their fate. Headlights in the distance, a vehicle moving through the desert. The tension builds immediately. If they can seize the vehicle, they might escape the freezing march and reach the border faster. The patrol moves toward the vehicle carefully, weapons ready. The plan was simple: ambush the vehicle, take it, drive towards Syria. But the situation spirals out of control. As the SAS soldiers attempt to hijack the vehicle, Iraqi troops suddenly appear nearby. The desert erupts into gunfire. Tracer rounds streak through the darkness as both sides open fire. In the chaos of the firefight, Corporal Bob Consiglio fights fiercely to protect the rest of the team. But the Iraqi forces are closing fast. Consiglio is struck during the battle and killed in action. Another member of the patrol falls. The surviving men break contact and continue the desperate escape. But the freezing desert is now claiming victims as quickly as enemy bullets. Hours later, the patrol reaches a freezing river cutting across the landscape. The water is black and icy under the night sky, but crossing it might help them evade the Iraqi pursuit. Corporal Steve Lane volunteers to cross first. He wades into the freezing water, forcing his way across the river. The current is brutal, the cold is instant and crushing. Lane manages to reach the opposite bank, but the freezing water has drained his remaining strength. Within a short time, his body begins to shut down. Hypothermia takes hold. Despite surviving the river crossing, Lane collapses and dies shortly afterward from exposure. The patrol is now reduced again. What began as 8 soldiers is becoming a disaster. Meanwhile, Iraqi search units continue sweeping across the desert. Helicopters circle overhead. Vehicles comb through the landscape. Eventually, the remaining members of the first group are surrounded. Andy McNabb, Dinger Pring, Mal McGowan. Exhausted, freezing, and outnumbered, they are captured by Iraqi forces. The mission is over. The survivors are transported to one of Iraq's most notorious prisons, Abu Ghraib. Inside the prison, the tension shifts from survival to endurance. The captured SAS soldiers are subjected to brutal treatment, beatings, interrogations, mock executions designed to break their mental resistance. The Iraqi interrogators are desperate for information, but the men endure. Even under torture, they refuse to provide useful intelligence. Their ordeal continues for weeks until the end of the Gulf War. But while these men are enduring captivity, one member of the patrol is still moving through the desert. Chris Ryan. Separated from the others during the chaos of the retreat, Ryan has continued the escape alone. No support, no supplies, just a compass, a rifle, and the determination to survive. Ryan begins what will become one of the most extraordinary escape and evasion stories in modern military history. The Syrian border lies hundreds of kilometers away, but he starts walking. Night after night, he moves through the freezing desert, avoiding roads, avoiding villages, avoiding Iraqi patrols searching the area. He has almost no food, very little water. The dehydration becomes brutal. Eventually, he is forced to drink contaminated water just to survive. His body weakens as the days pass, but he keeps moving. The distance he covers becomes almost unimaginable. Over the course of 7 days, Chris Ryan walks roughly 300 kilometers across hostile territory. Every step is a battle against exhaustion. Every mile pushes his body closer to collapse. Finally, after nearly a week alone in the desert, he sees something that signals the end of the nightmare: the Syrian border. Ryan crosses into Syria, barely able to stand. Local authorities eventually transfer him to British officials. His condition is severe. He has lost over 16 kilograms of body weight. His body is ravaged by dehydration and exhaustion, but he is alive. Chris Ryan becomes the only member of Bravo 20 to successfully escape. The story quickly spreads after the war ends. The patrol becomes legendary, but the story also becomes controversial. Different members of the patrol tell slightly different versions of events. Books are written. Investigations are conducted. One researcher, former SAS soldier Michael Asher, even retraces the patrol route in Iraq. His findings challenge parts of the original accounts. He suggests the Iraqi forces involved may have been smaller than initially believed. Other details about how the patrol was discovered remain disputed. Was it a goat herd, a farmer, or an Iraqi patrol? The exact moment the mission was compromised may never be fully known. But one fact remains undeniable. Bravo 20 became the most famous SAS patrol since the Second World War. The mission did not destroy any Scud launchers, but the endurance shown by the men became legendary. Several members of the patrol received military decorations for their actions. Chris Ryan was awarded the Military Medal. Andy McNabb received the Distinguished Conduct Medal. And the lessons learned from the mission forced major changes in military doctrine. Better winter equipment, improved communication systems, and greater support for deep reconnaissance teams. But perhaps the most powerful legacy of Bravo 20 is the human story. 8 soldiers dropped into hostile territory, a mission that collapsed into chaos, a freezing desert that became as deadly as the enemy. And a survival story that still echoes through military history today. Because sometimes the most important battles are not about victory, they are about endurance and the will to keep moving when everything around you is falling apart.